Okay, this is the second video for section 9.4, and we're going to graph and write some equations of ellipses now that you're familiar with what an ellipse is and the format of the equations. So, the first equation says graph an equation of an ellipse, 9x squared plus 36y squared equals 324. Okay, so the first thing you have to note is when you have an ellipse, both the x and the y are squared versus when you have a parabola, only one of them is squared. Okay, so I know that this is an ellipse, just in case I didn't tell you. You also know that the standard form equation always equals 1. Well, it doesn't equal 1, it equals 324. So I need to, first and foremost, divide everything by 324 so that that's equal to 1. So 9 over 324 happens to be x squared over 36. I don't want to squeeze that in there. Okay, so x squared over 36. 36 over 324 reduces to y squared over 9, and of course 324 over 324 is 1. So now it's in standard form because it equals 1, and you want to first identify is a squared underneath the x squared or the y squared. So please remind yourself that with an ellipse, a squared is always the larger number. Okay, so that means, I'll just write it down here, a squared is 36, and that means b squared has to be the 9, because 36 is larger than 9. So I know there's no shifting, and I haven't talked about any shifting yet. So because there's no shifting, I know that the center of my ellipse is going to be at the origin. Okay, and I'm going to blow up my graph for just a second. Okay, so I know that the center is going to be at the origin, so I'm just going to kind of draw an X there. Okay. Other things I know then is that because the larger number is underneath X, that it's going to be a horizontal parabola. So I'm just going to, in parentheses here, not parabola, sorry, a horizontal ellipse. So it's going to be a horizontal ellipse because my larger number is in the x direction. So if a squared is 36, I know that a is 6. If b squared is 9, I know that b is 3, and I'm sure that makes sense. I just square rooted those numbers. So from my center, my vertices are going to be in the x direction, because vertice is always in the larger numbers direction, so horizontal or x direction. It's going to be 6 units from the center. Okay, so the center, in fact, I'm going to add center because I guess I don't have it here. So the center is at the origin. So my vertices are going to be 6 units from the center, so it's going to be at 6, 0, and negative 6, 0. My co-vertices then are going to be 3 units in the y direction because that's underneath y. So my co-vertices are going to be at 0, 3, and 0, negative 3. Okay, and I'm going to stop and graph those first. Okay, so my vertices were at 6, 0, and negative 6, 0, and my vertices, and my co-vertices were at 0, 3, and 0, negative 3, and as best as I can, I'm going to draw an ellipse through those points. It usually ends up being a little lopsided. Then last but not least, I need to find my foci. Okay, so my foci are always going to be, let's see, I think I will write this equation up here. C squared equals a squared minus b squared. Okay, so I know a squared is 36, and b squared is 9, and 36 minus 9, of course, is 27. So c squared equals 27. Square root both sides and reduce that, so that's going to be plus or minus 3 root 3, because 27 is 9 times 3. And that's c. Okay, so my foci are going to be 3 square root of 3 units from the center. Well, since the center is at my origin, And I know my foci will be in the x direction because it's a horizontal parabola. Okay, so my foci will be at 0, 3, root 3, and 0, negative 3, root 3. And roughly, the square root of 27 is a little over 5, right? So I'm going to say like 5.2-ish, and I'm going to use a different color over here. So if I first blow up my graph, my foci are at the square root of 27, which is a little over 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a little over 5, and a little over negative 5, and those are my two foci points. They're in green. So let me just reiterate this. So c squared equals a squared plus b squared is how you find, well, c is the distance from the center of your ellipse to the foci. Okay, so from the center to those green points that I have there are going to be c units. So I knew a squared was 36, b squared was 9. The difference between those is 27. Square root of that, and 3 root 3 is a little over 5. And so I plotted those points. Vertices were in the x direction because it's horizontal. The larger numbers under x. Co-vertices in the y direction because the smaller number is under y. I think that's everything you need to know. All right, this one says to write an equation of the ellipse that has a vertex at 0, 7 and a co-vertex at negative 4, 0 and centered at the origin. Now, notice my disclaimer says to sketch the ellipse as a check for your final equation. You don't have to graph anything, and a lot of you won't feel the need to do this. So I'm going to, because I'm a visual person, and I know some of you also are. So if I were just to sketch that I have a vertex at 0, 7, actually I'm going to blow this up a little bit. Okay, so my vertex is at 0, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, I know if I have a vertex at 0, 7 centered at the origin, that I'm going to have one at 0, 3, 4, 5, 6, negative 7 also. Definitely some safe moves. Okay. Then I know I have a co-vertex at negative 4, 0. So that means that my other vertex is at positive 4, 0. So here and here. And again, you really didn't have to draw the ellipse, but it might be helpful. Okay, so there is that ellipse and centered at the origin. Okay, so then it says to write the equation. Well, first and foremost, is that horizontal or vertical? Clearly vertical, right? Stretched in the y direction. So if I had not graphed this, I could see that my vertex is on the y-axis 7 units, so hence it's going to be stretched in the y direction, so it's going to be a vertical ellipse. Okay, so you really don't have to graph this to see that. Okay, so this is going to be a vertical ellipse, and because it's vertical and centered at the origin, which means there's no shifting, I know that my equation, the format of my equation, is going to be x squared plus y squared equals 1. The a squared, which is the larger number, is going to be underneath my y because it's stretched in the y direction. B squared is going to be my smaller number. Okay, so a is the distance from your center to a vertex. Well, if I hadn't drawn the picture, I can see that from my center to a vertex from 0 to 7 is 7 units. So a, or from my picture, I can see a is 7 units, right? So I know y squared is over 49 because 7 squared is 49. And b is the distance from my center to a co-vertex, and I can easily see from my picture that that's 4 units, or again, from negative 4 to 0 is 4 units. So 4 squared was a game I liked to play when I was in elementary school, but other than that, 4 squared, mathematically speaking, is 16. And that is it. Piece of cake. All right, last one. Write an equation of an ellipse that has a vertex at negative 6, 0 and a focus at 5, 0. So again, if you wanted to sketch this, you could. Okay, so your vertex is at negative 6, 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Negative 6, 0. You also know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, positive 6, 0 would be your other vertex. And the focus point is going to be at 5, 0, and then it would have to be at negative 5, 0. By the way, how did I know? Oh, and centered at the origin, sorry. So I knew the other 2 points, of course, correspond to that. I don't know what my co-vertices are, however, I can't estimate what those are. So I do know that because my vertex is in the x direction, that I'm going to have, I'm just estimating this, but I'm going to have a horizontal ellipse. Okay, so x squared plus y squared equals 1. A squared is going to go underneath my x squared because it's stretched in the, my vertex is stretched in the x direction. Well, from the center to my vertex is 6 units, right? And I can go in either direction. So that means that A is 6, so A squared is 36. Now, I don't know B squared, but I know my focus point, or a focus point. So I do know C squared equals A squared minus B squared. Well, I know A squared now is 36, and I know C squared is the distance from the center to my focus point. Well, my focus point is at 5, 0, so I know that from my origin to my focus point is 5 units. That's going to be C. Okay, so I can fill in, if C is 5, C squared is 25. Well, do a little math. I'm going to add my B squared over, and I'm going to subtract my 25 over, so B squared is going to equal 11, and that's all I need. B squared is, oops, sorry about that, B squared is 11. And there we go.